welcome to Comic Boom, the Comics in Education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice. And hopefully as well shine some light on titles you can bring into your libraries, your classrooms, and also onto your bookshelves at home as well. Today I am joined by the lovely, the brilliant and the very, very funny Hannah Berry. Hannah is an award-winning comics creator, scriptwriter and campaigner. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, very fancy, and was appointed UK Comics Laureate from 2019 to 2021. Editions of her books have been published in the USA, France, Holland, Serbia and Italy, and she's been a guest speaker at over 150 comics, literature and arts festivals and events from around the world. Hannah's first graphic novel, Britain and Brew Lightly, was published by Jonathan Cape in 2008. She then went on to publish her second graphic novel, Adamantine, which is now being optioned to be made into a film, a horror film, which is really exciting. That's just news straight out this week. We don't talk about that in this episode because it hadn't happened yet, but very excited to hear that. Hannah has loads to speak about. As her bio says, she has spoken at a lot of different comics festivals. I've heard her speak at education conferences, and we talk about a lot in this episode. We talk about gender in comics, we talk about the subtlety of comics and how they can be used and explored in so many different ways, and lots of different takeouts. Quite a varied conversation. We talk about her role as comics laureate as well, and of course her journey to becoming a comics creator. I think she's a very lovely human being, really great person to have a chat to. Here's what Hannah had to say. Hello Hannah, welcome to Comic Boom.
Thank you for having me in Comic Boom.
You are very welcome. To start off with, our standard intro for guests is to ask them to tell us a little bit about their journey as a comics reader, first of all. Where did that all start for you way back when?
Way back when I was young. I'm actually not sure what my first comics would have been, but I really cut my teeth on comics by reading Calvin and Hobbes. That was my main comics fodder growing up. Just the best. And I remember that I was definitely at least 6 at the time, because I know that Calvin is 6 and he has a very grand vocabulary. And I remember thinking, oh, I wish mine was as big as his. I wish I knew as many words as Calvin does.
Vocabulary jealousy at age 6. That's quite impressive.
Well, I was very advanced. And I just relaxed. Relaxed and evened out, and now I'm just sort of average. But I was a very clever kid.
Of course.
And I used to read, obviously, Raymond Briggs. Of course, Raymond Briggs, the Snowman and Father Christmas and all of those. And maybe not When the Wind Blows until I was a bit older, I think. And my aunt used to send over from Canada the funny pages. So I was reading things like Hagar the Horrible, and Doonesbury, and Cathy, and things like that. Things that, like, the cultural context, no idea what's going on there, but for the large part. But I just enjoyed the format, and it was really fun to read. And so that was my way. And I mean, comics were quite. There was never a point where I was told, you should be reading proper books. You should be reading serious things, especially as such a clever child as you definitely are.
Accepted.
that never. Yeah. It was normal reading fodder in our household. And
did you maintain that interest throughout? Was there ever a time period where you were like less interested, or have you always carried that through?
Do you know what? There was, because I wasn't really into a lot of the comics that were available to me as a young person growing up in the 90s. So I wasn't especially into 2000 AD or any of the I don't even know if girls' comics were around in those days, but I really didn't like anything that was strictly gendered looking. Maybe because of my own attitudes towards gender. I'll approach it with a long stick, I suppose. But I didn't really want to read anything that was like, this is for you. You have the appropriate genitalia for this particular material.
Yeah.
So, and even though 2000 AD wasn't like that, that's how I thought it was. So I avoided everything, and thought there was nothing really. I assumed there was nothing for me to read. There was after all these shorter comics as a kid, there wasn't massive amounts around for me to read growing up. I remember reading the comics adaptations of The Colour of Magic and The Light Fantastic, the Terry Pratchett books, which kind of rekindled a bit. But there was nothing that really brought me back into comics properly until about the time I went to art school. My mum went to Brussels and came back with an armful of bande dessinée, and they really opened my eyes, because they were, I can't read French, I should say. I have no idea what they said. But the artwork, it was clearly for adults. It was clearly, mature content. Not mature content, because, my mum brought them back for me. But it was clearly something which was designed for an older reader. And I really loved that kind of sophisticated artwork, and it really drew me in. And so I'd always been doing my own comics, but that really made me realise this is what I'd like to do, even if there's not a career in it in the UK in any form. I'll just pursue this. I'll just do it in my own time and see what happens. And that is what happened.
Very cool. So what were you doing at art school? Were you doing fine art? Were you doing illustration?
I was doing illustration. I think it would have been, what did I do? I went to Basingstoke Technical College, did a national diploma. And then I went
I'm not far from Basingstoke. I'm in Newbury.
Oh, no way. I grew up just outside of Basingstoke. Fun times. Oh.
Okay.
I didn't realise. And then I went to Brighton Uni to do illustration. And, it was no disrespect meant to Brighton University's illustration course of the early noughts, but it was not. They were not enamoured with comics, especially.
You're the second person that said that to me in recent times.
Really?
Jess Bradley was talking about, not Brighton, but a different university that she did illustration at. And that it was very frowned upon.
Yeah, it was seen as being really puerile. I mean, I did do a couple of comics, and because the main thing that I learned in illustration in this course was that every single thing has to have meaning. Everything sort of lends itself to like a greater understanding of what you're trying to get across. So whenever I did something as a comic, people would say, "Oh, you're trying to say it's puerile and it's for kids. I get you." It's like, no, I've just done it sequentially. So it always backfires. So I just did comics, did them for myself, did them for me. Nobody has to see these. And
did you did kind of small press publishing?
Well, what I did, I tried to do small press publishing one time, and you know how the idea is that you do lots of copies at a small cost, and you get as many as possible. You distribute far and wide. What I did was do a few copies at very high cost, like hand bound, like proper binding. I don't know what I was thinking, but there's a group of us that went to the London Artist Book Fair, and I didn't do especially well there. But what I did do was, whilst I was studying, at the very end of the course, they said, right, everyone go away and do whatever you need to do to fill your portfolio for this last project. And I thought, well, what my portfolio is desperately missing is a nice, big, juicy comic. And so I started working on the comic that then became my first graphic novel, Britain and Brew Lightly. And I don't think I had anything to show for this first project. I got a feeling it was just a script and maybe 3 or 4 pages of not especially well-drawn comic. So I graduated and obviously did what every art student does, which is go into non-arty jobs. I was, temping, working at Blockbusters, the classics. And I thought, I'll just see if anybody's interested in this graphic novel, just to check, because I would quite like to do this as a career. Otherwise, oh God, what can I do in my life? So I sent a letter to Jonathan Cape and I can't remember if it was Vertigo or Dark Horse, one of the two. Whichever one it was, they never replied, so screw them. But Jonathan Cape wrote back and said, yes, tell us what you have, send it to us, we'd be interested. This would have been 2005. So, I mean, it was sort of the start of the graphic novel comic resurgence, like the graphic novels on the shelves of Waterstones kind of resurgence. And there wasn't a huge amount about. But anyway, so I sent it to them, they said, yeah, we'll have that. And that was really the start of my whole career, from that stupidly simple exchange. But I think it was really just being in the right place at the right time, because they published Posey Simmons and they published Jimmy Corrigan, Chris Ware's award-winning in the UK book. Maybe it's won awards in the States as well, I'm not sure. And a few others, Joe Sacco. And they thought, well, there's some homegrown comics people interested in putting out graphic novels. And then at that point, I happened to get in touch. So it was very much, very, 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 very much the right place at the right time, which is nice.
Perfect timing. If you think about your early educational experiences pre-university, can you identify anything that really you think particularly helped you on the path to becoming the person you are today, the comics creator you are today?
Well, I really love writing. I really love creative writing, and I really love drawing. And the two were never, I don't think they're ever together, but the two separately, I had fantastic teachers all the way through school. I have a post-it note somewhere that my English teacher, Miss Dignam, wrote saying, what are you going to do with your life? People will pay to read your writing, which is just the nicest thing that anybody had ever said at that point. Probably still since. It's the nicest post-it note I've ever received. And I was quite studious in a way. I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I've very recently realised that I've got ADHD. And I've been asked to look back over my childhood and see times when it manifested. And it's really hard to pinpoint any. I think the way that I made things interesting was by making, to myself, in order to do the actual work, was by making essays funny and by making drawings, like doodling on everything. And so those two kind of weird coping mechanisms have kind of bled into my actual career, which is a bit of a weird one.
And do you think that drawing itself kind of helps you channel your thoughts and channel this kind of the story and the narrative that you want to get out?
I think so. Sometimes I find that I'm more about writing things down on an editable document, and definitely not on a piece of paper, but on a Word document, or not Word. Other platforms are available. Just in a way that can be
anything but Word.
Oh God, anything but Word. Scrivener is very good. I love Scrivener. But writing things down in a document where you can chop and change things and move them backwards and forwards, and go back to a thought you had earlier and edit that. And that's sort of how I work, is by having just a big brain dump on the page or on a Scrivener document, and putting everything down and then arranging it into a kind of order, and then sort of fleshing out bits and pieces, moving things around, adding bits in, cutting bits out. And that sort of works with my mental process. Whereas when I'm drawing, because I don't know if you've seen my drawings, but they're very finickety. Clenched is a word that some might use. And I wouldn't have said
no. I find when I look at your drawings, I'm tinged with a little bit of jealousy.
Oh, don't be jealous. It's just clenching. It's just artistic clenching.
That's very talented drawing of figures, and then also the environments as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, stand out.
It's very kind of you. But I'm not very good at editing and that thought process that I thought everybody thought this way, but it turns out not. But that jumbled up thought process is not really conducive to drawing the thoughts out so much.
That's interesting.
But I mean, everyone I know, everyone works differently, and yeah.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. Whenever, as a comics creator on the podcast, I always ask about process. I just find it really, really interesting how different people work.
Yeah. I mean, I've known people that write in blocks of prose and then cut it down into chunks and edit it into a comic. And I've known people that have drawn images as like their keyframes in an animation, like the key images they see in their heads, and then will fill in the bits in between. It's really interesting to see how people work.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Mark Jackson, who's been on the podcast before, he was telling me that the first thing he puts down is when he's like laying out the panel is the writing, and then he draws the images.
Oh, interesting! Really,
it's like the complete opposite of how because I normally draw. I mean, obviously, I'm this is very amateur in my own hobbyish way creating comics, but I always feel like I ruined it when I put the words on.
Oh, really?
No.
Do you lay them on top with another, like with Photoshop or something, or with another program?
Do it in Procreate or something like that. Yeah. But I don't. It's because there's lack of planning, basically. It's just lack of planning. It's like I just thought of a nice picture, and then I've got to ruin it by putting on the words.
You can always write them underneath, like Rupert the Bear.
Yeah, could do.
Just a thought.
One of the things that's been coming out is quite organically a theme of this season of Comic Boom is around comics creation and collaboration, but it seems like it's quite a solitary process for you, is it? Or does your writing process include other people?
It does when I've got to the right stage, because I've realised there's a really dangerous stage early on where you have an idea that you're really excited about, and you need someone to tell you, this is amazing, I'm really impressed with this idea. But it needs to be after you've done enough work. Otherwise, I say this is me. Otherwise, I will I will be, I'll just sit back and rest on my laurels and say, well, I've entertained that person, that idea's done. Let's move on. But I can't really, I really like to work with other people. I don't do much collaborative working. It's really nice to be able to share ideas with others. I love to be able to, during that, I love like a editorial input in the writing stage, because I feel like you write and there are things that you write and you think there's something wrong with it and I don't know what it is, and a good editor will say this is what's wrong with it, and you'll know it once they've said it. Oh, of course that was what was wrong all along. Or things that you wouldn't have even thought of that are wildly wrong that needs correcting. I mean, I love that in the creative process. I don't do huge amounts of writing for other people, but I am planning to, in the near future, have a thing that I'm kicking around that I will not be drawing, because it's not my style. My style's too clenched, for starters. Too clenched for that.
I like the idea of clenched being a drawing style.
I'm going to film myself drawing and see if I have a facial expression to go with that as well. I bet I do.
You've hinted there, but what are you working on at the moment? Have you got a current project? Are there things in the pipeline? What lies in the future?
Well, there's the thing that I will hopefully be asking someone to draw, but I can't discuss that, because if I tell it to you now and you say, "Oh, that's good," then I'll tick the box that I've entertained a person with it, and it will shut down.
Okay, keep that top secret.
Yeah, that's for the hopefully not too distant future. I think the main thing I'm doing at the moment is basically a lot of campaigning is what I'm doing at the moment, which is not work, it's work adjacent. I'm part of the Comics Cultural Impact Collective, and there's 7 of us. We've only been going for a few months, and we're all connected to comics, working in comics. Some of us make comics, some of us work around comics, and we are trying to basically raise awareness and increase support for comics as a medium and people creating comics, because there's not a huge amount out there. I mean, all of us in our different ways have worked alongside and around and with people in various areas of the arts and other kinds of engagement around science and bits and bobs. And there's money, there's funding out there, there's support out there, but none of it is for comics. So we're trying to address that. Our first step is to gather all of the stats and the data and the proof that we can that comics are a very important art form and have a wide readership and are very accessible and are very appealing and very useful and very good for retaining information and sharing information. Because we've realised that nobody will do anything unless there's solid proof that something is good and worthwhile. So this is phase 1. And then alongside this, we are approaching different organisations and groups who fund cultural activities. Like, for example, Arts Council England. That's the first group that the first and the easiest target to approach, to say, hey, comics, what about comics?
Yeah.
Because we've done a few freedom of information requests and we've realised how dramatically underfunded comics are compared to other areas of the arts. And comics is a very accessible art form. It's a very appealing art form. It's an art form that anybody can enjoy. You know, all you need to do is pick up a pen and take a photo and put it online, and you are not a photo of you picking up a pen. I should clarify. Pick up a pen, draw a comic, and then take a photo and put it online, and you are you're a self-published comics creator. It's very accessible to get into, but also it's very accessible to read and engage with as somebody, as a reader. So we worked out that, so not to opera bash, because opera gets a lot of stick. However, it is a nice, big, juicy target. So we worked out recently, with the caveat, this is according to our very quickly sourced data, so it's not super robust. But we did work out that 3.8% of adults engage with opera, whereas around a third of adults engaging with comics. That wasn't our data. But the amount that's spent on national portfolio organisations by Arts Council England on opera equates to about, I think it's about £16 per head, of people who are engaged as an audience. And for comics, it was about 9p. So
wow. That's quite striking.
It's quite striking, isn't it? There's a bit of a disparity there. Anyway, so that's been our campaign, and we've had an article recently in the Bookseller, and that I think that went down quite well.
It was really. It was great, eye-catching, very beautiful, and just really jam-packed with statistics.
Juicy, meaty statistics.
Very, very thought-provoking. What's been the kind of reception of that?
We've had a lot of interest since then. We have a website, the Comics Cultural Impact Collective.org. It's not snappy, but it's there. And we have an email address that people can contact us on, and a mailing list that people can subscribe to. And from the responses to those and some bits and pieces on social media, it seems to have really caught a few people's attention in the publishing industry, in the book industry. And that's really what we wanted, because I think the problem is that there's just a vast gap between people who are interested in reading comics and people who are interested in producing comics. it's I know they're very, very expensive to make, and I know the economies of scale are not there for publishing comics, and it's they take a long time, and the level of work involved and the cost of production is very high. But the audience could potentially be there. It is technically there. It just needs to be worked on and fed. I mean, at the moment, the audience is being largely fed by manga, which is stepping into the breach, especially with younger readers. It's a huge boom.
Yeah, so interesting. And so at the moment, you're just raising awareness. Is there kind of an end goal? Is there a deadline that you want to achieve it by?
We don't have a deadline as such. We do have in the new year, and all the details will be on the website, but in the new year, we're hoping to have kind of a roundtable discussion with everyone who is involved with comics, either making comics or is involved with comics in their organisations. But anybody who really shares our kind of ideals around comics, to try to discuss our next steps as a community and work out where we go, and to try and maybe recruit people and organisations to form sort of action groups to tackle, because there's so many different areas that comics is falling down in, or is being let down in. So at this roundtable as well, we'd like to form some kind of task forces, action groups, people with a certain set of skills, like Liam Neeson, who can go out and solve or help tackle some of the different issues around comics. So, whether it be in comics and education or comics and academia or children's publishing, or all these different areas where there's shortfalls that people can step into. So that will be happening in January. And ultimately, our main goal is to try to form an organisation that can support comics creators, a non-profit organisation that can step in. Because we've realised as well from looking at different levels of funding in Arts Council, you can apply for funding. The way it works at the moment is you can apply for funding below £30,000 or above £30,000, or as a national portfolio organisation. Well, there's only one comics national portfolio organisation, which is LICAF. Well done, LICAF. Good work. Good work.
Oh, really? Is that the only one? I didn't know that.
That's the only one in comics, which is pretty sad, to be honest. And I think in the last year there were no applications above £30,000, which to us it suggests that it's only individuals applying for their own specific work. It's not organisations who are applying for larger projects. And I think the reason for that is there's not a lot of comics organisations that are out there that can apply for funding. It's not that they're not eligible.
Got that kind of structure. It's quite a lot. It's a huge network to make one of those really big applications.
Yes,
in terms of
it takes a huge amount of time.
It's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, and it's something that is not feasible for a lot of organisations in comics, because they're by and large quite small. They don't have a dedicated person to focus on that kind of application, which means that there's no organisations to kind of cascade down that funding, that Arts Council funding, to individual creators. So it's a weird kind of a bootstrap situation where you can't apply for funding because you're not in a position to be able to apply for funding because you don't have the money. So it's sort of an annoying vicious circle, circular, vicious, annoying circle, something along those lines.
It is.
I did a survey in 2020 to find out more about comics creators, and I asked people to specify where they were in their career. So it's people who were doing it professionally, people who were kind of newcomers, and people who were doing it as like dabbling, I guess is the phrase. And there was some umming and ahhing over whether I should be including the people who are doing it as a hobby or dabbling on the side. And I honestly believe, of course we should, because if the industry was there, then these people would be working in comics, but it's not there. So I wholeheartedly believe that even people who are, especially people who are doing it in their own free time, are classed officially as comics creators. There was the other thing that came out of that survey that was really shocking to me was that one in 10 of the people who say that comics is their main career are only able to do it in their spare time, around other day jobs or caring things or other responsibilities. Yeah. So I found that really striking and annoying. if I'm honest. It shouldn't be that way. You don't see I don't know, Ian McEwan doing it in his spare time around his job at Morrison's. I don't know why I picked on Ian McEwan there.
That's true.
Yeah, Ian. No offense to Ian McEwan, I'm sure he's fine.
I think it'll be really interesting, actually, to hear about how you became Comics Laureate.
Oh, I breathed the right palms,
Well, that's what I'd heard.
Got to know the right people, Lucy.
And I guess, how I'm interested in its kind of impact. Did you think, is that how you became sort of so passionate in this kind of campaigning element, and how, if it sort of changed the trajectory of your career, you think, doing that?
I think it definitely lit a rocket under me.
I couldn't tell you how I was chosen because I was not party to that decision. I'm assuming there were lottery balls and straws drawn and things like that. I'm not entirely sure how it happened. I'm the third laureate, and the first two laureates were the very esteemed Charlie Adlard and Dave Gibbons.
Yeah, because you were the first female Comics Laureate, of course. Why do you think you were selected?
I think you don't have to get through too many very established female comics creators before you reach me, because there's not loads of us due to the entrenched issues in working in comics over. I mean, it's very different now. Thankfully, it's changing, but it's not an easy career to have. If you have a child, then it can be trickier for female creators. Also, it has been a bit of a boys' club in past times. I'm sorry to say that, guys, but it kind of has.
For sure. I've just been doing some stats on the podcast episode so far. 66% women contributors.
Oh. Well done. That's the way it should be.
Amplifying voices. That's what we're doing.
When I did that survey, I don't think we put this in the final thing, but at some point we did work out, just for out of our own interest, the gender balance before the sort of the resurgence of the early noughts and after. And after, it's much more evenly split, and before, it's very, very heavily male skewed. Anyway, so that's all this to say. I kind of see it as a responsibility to be visible, to let other upcoming female creators know that you can reach the dizzying heights of laureate. You too can be laureate.
And can you explain a little bit about what the laureate role is? What does it mean? It's an unpaid role, is that right? I saw that recently. I was like, oh, no money in it?
Well, I think it depends on the laureate. I'm not sure if this is too much, how the sausage is made. I had a stipend because I need it to work on Comics Laureate things.
Yeah.
I don't have any long running franchises to pay my bills.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's always paid or unpaid. I think maybe
it changes depending on the that makes sense.
So the role itself was created to help promote the use of comics as a tool for literacy, to help get people into reading from all walks of life, and also as an ambassadorial role for comics. And it's very open, actually. We're sort of allowed to choose which direction we head in. I know that Charlie was very focused on dyslexia because I think his son is dyslexic, and found comics is a very useful tool. So he was sort of promoting it in that area. And from my previous life, I used to do admin for the probation service. And I became very aware that the reading age of offenders in prison is shockingly low, tiny, really awful. And so I wanted to try and use comics to help, as a tool for reading, for literacy amongst offenders, and then also for people learning English as a foreign language. And again, these are both the sort of areas that are quite underserved, I think, in, culturally speaking. And we would have got away with it too if it hadn't been for that pesky COVID that came along. We had some grand plans in 2019, and then unfortunately, all those plans in 2020, everything sort of stopped. Well, I mean, maybe you could pick it up again. It could be picked up again in the future at some point.
And I've seen you talk at the National Literacy Trust Teachers Conference, and you were calling comic literacy Swiss Army knife. Could you unpack that a little bit about what you mean by that and what you think the potential is for comics in terms of boosting literacy and engagement?
I mean, it's very stabby, I meant. Very stabby comics are.
Or are they the tiny corkscrew?
Yes. stabby to different effective levels. No, it was. I think when people think of comics, quite often the most obvious thing people think of is the superhero comics because they're the most visible, and so I think people don't really equate comics with subtlety. I think that is often missed, and comics are so subtle because they can be very subtle, because every single element of a comic, every part of a panel, every piece that is sort of placed together, the elements that are used, the way they're juxtaposed with each other, the different colors, the different language used, the sort of the placing of things in a scene, the blocking, I guess that would be called, all these different elements, and the pacing of the thing and the shape of the panels and the layout. Everything contributes to a greater meaning. I feel like comics is quite often compared with prose books wrongly, because I think they're a lot closer to poetry because there are fewer elements very carefully chosen. And the way that you choose these elements and the way that you use them changes the meaning so wildly. I mean, the comics are used sort of journalistically. They're used to portray personal events. They're used to portray silence and internal meaning. They're used to portray superheroes punching each other. I mean, there's so much possibility with them.
I was going to say that I think the comic artist Seth said that I'm paraphrasing, but that comics were more poetry and graphic design than art and writing. I think those are the two things he was comparing, that they're closer to poetry and graphic design, which I think is quite cool. And I think and also really relates to his work specifically.
Yeah, lots of silence. Yeah, I think it's a very true point. And if Seth said it, who are we to argue?
Yeah, bow down. At the end of the podcasts, I ask guests to wrap up what they've been saying, maybe provide a few takeouts for educators, librarians, and other comics creators maybe who are listening. Can you maybe draw some threads together? It could be things that you haven't said yet, some additional points or some sort of summaries that kind of sum up your perspectives on comics and education.
Sure. I think comics are fantastic when they're used as a tool for self-expression. I know that comics are they're a great tool for literacy. They're great to read other people's thoughts and ideas, but they're also fantastic for getting your own ideas out there and to really express yourself. I think because of the subtlety and because of the silence and because of the the control over every single element, it can feel very personal, and I think there's an implicit invitation to be sincere with comics. And I think especially maybe older kids who are coming to terms with their identities and things and working out who they are, I think it could be quite a useful tool to encourage them to use comics to express their own views on things.
I think that's a really good point. I've been thinking about the potential of there being a space within comics to support children, young people to communicate their experience of education, their experience of their daily lives, and that could be a really useful tool to support developing a greater understanding of where they're coming from. Children, we've got issues. I'm thinking of it almost in a kind of a graphic medicine, but in a kind of special educational needs setting. I just think in terms of different way of children being able to communicate their perspectives. I think it would be a really interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, actually, and you know what? I hadn't really made this connection before, but there are definitely a lot of creators who are neurodivergent, as I am myself, as it turns out. And I think there are real concerns with self-expression, with making yourself understood in the way that you want to be understood. And I think comics, because you have, again, as I say, you have that control over all these different elements. I think it's not a coincidence that there are so many people working in comics who are autistic and have ADHD and are neurodivergent. I think it's an ideal way to reach out and make yourself understood on your own terms.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really want to delve into it. It's sort of, I quite often have moments where I'm like, oh, I wish I was still in the classroom and I could actually, like, tomorrow go and see what would happen. I get a teaching itch.
What's stopping you from just walking into a classroom tomorrow? Oh, sorry.
Quite a lot.
Legally, there are issues.
But yes, it would be an interesting project I'd like to investigate at some point. I'm interested to hear what your recommendation will be for us. The final thing of the podcast is for the guests to recommend a book for our to be read piles. If only one title, Could be a comic or a book about comics, or actually some people just choose a different type of book. But what would you recommend?
This is a tough one. I mean, can I recommend two?
I did say I was having a crack down this series because some people just flout the rules, but I will allow you, seeing as you're a former comics laureate, I'll allow you to have two.
Okay, feel free to. I'll say two, and then you can edit one out.
Or just bleep over it so people can't hear.
Yeah, my other recommendation is. I've most recently just devoured Ducks by Kate Beaton. I really, really enjoyed that. I mean, I like her work anyway. I find her work very funny, and her dialogue is chef's kiss. But I have to say chef's kiss because it's podcast form. Otherwise, I would actually mind.
Do you usually just go around saying the word chef's kiss?
I'm one of those people that says hashtag before actual words in real life. No, I'm not. I would never. I don't do that. Do I? Actually? God, I hope I don't do that.
Hashtag comics.
Anyway, sorry. I really enjoyed it. It was so compelling in a way that I was not expecting it to be. It's an autobiographical story of her time working the tar sands in Canada, and it's just a really good sort of look at the people who are working there and where they are in their lives, and misogyny and environmental issues and migration, and it's really fascinating. So that's number one, and then number two, I'm going to choose. So this doesn't have to be for kids, does it?
No. Yeah.
So
it's just to enrich our own reading for pleasure.
Okay, I'm going to. My second one is Blackwood by Hannah Eaton, which it's sort of a very dark folk horror from a couple of years ago, and it's all about this kind of this fictional town with some goings on, and it's very. I mean, it's sort of an intergeneration. It's all like intergenerational trauma. As sort of looks at this kind of the way that people relate to each other, and the kind of the traumas that are passed on, and manifest themselves in different family members. But yeah, it's a really good book. It's really gripping and quite surprisingly funny as well. And it's all done in really lovely, her lovely pencil work, which is very nice as well. I like a bit of pencil in a comic.
That sounds very good. I've not heard of the second one. The first one has been on my radar for a while. I really like the cover of it and it definitely appeals to me. Yeah, they sound brilliant. So thank you very much for those recommendations.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
We're at the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Don't celebrate it that much. But yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You've been a brilliant guest.
You are very welcome.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Hannah, for coming on to the show. Loads of brilliant takeouts, I think, from that episode, and just really great to hear you talk about your process and how you became a comics creator. A little bit of serendipity, a lot of talent going into that journey. I have actually dug out my vague reference to a quote from Seth about poetry and graphic novels, and I will read that quote to you because I think it's really interesting. So this is from a 2018 interview with Nick Susanis, who's been mentioned on the podcast before, interviewing Seth. The interview is called Poetry, Design and Comics, an interview with Seth, and it's from Carousel 19, Spring-Summer 2006. If you want to find it, here is what the interview says. The words and pictures that make up comics language are often described as prose and illustration combined. Bad metaphor. Poetry and graphic design seems more apt. Poetry for the rhythm and condensing. Graphic design because cartooning is more about moving shapes around, designing, than it is about drawing. Obviously, when creating a strip about a man walking down the street, you are drawing pictures of the man and the environment. However, you are also trying to simplify these drawings down into a series of more iconic graphic renderings. I think that's just really interesting. I really love that quote. It's something that I include in presentations when I'm working with teachers, just to try and prompt thinking and reflecting about comics and graphic novels in a different way. I think it's just an interesting perspective to look at things from. If you haven't explored the work of Seth, then I would definitely recommend you go and check out some of his, again, very graphic novels. Graphic in the kind of visual sense of shape and line, not graphic in terms of the content. So yeah, check those out. Very, very interesting. You can definitely see why he is such a famous and well-known comics creator. That's it from me. This is, in fact, very sadly, the end of season 3. But it's been a great season. Very, very conscious that it's been quite heavy on comics creators, and I've really tried for next season with the plans to get that mix back where we've got more librarians, educators, academics. I've got some really interesting academics to come and speak on next series. Would love to have some more librarians and educators. So if you're sitting there thinking, I could talk about my collections in my school, I could talk about how the comics club I run or how I engage children and young people to read comics in the library space or in the classroom, then I would absolutely love to hear from you. Do get in touch. There's always in the show notes an email address for the podcast. You can also contact me on Twitter at Lucy_Braidley. That's BRAIDLEY. I have got COVID at the moment, so sorry that I'm a little bit croaky. But yeah, get in contact. I would love to hear from you. You can also contact me via Instagram if you follow the podcast page there at comic_boom_podcast, and I'd love to hear from you that way as well. I love to get messages, people talking about things that are going on, have been discussed on the podcast. I'd love to hear your opinions, so please get in touch. That's what it's all about. The purpose of having the podcast for me is really about building that community around people who are interested in the same things as me, in education, in comics, in all of those things. So really love to hear from you. The only thing I need to say, just as we're wrapping up for the season, is a big thank you to all of the guests. I have been really, really thrilled with some of the themes that have come out of this podcast season, thinking about the environment, the role of comics to stimulate debate around climate change, thinking around collaboration between writers, collaboration between organisations, collaboration between children who are writing comics. That's been a really interesting and fascinating theme for me, and one that I think I'm definitely now going to notice and pick up on every time it comes up, because I think that's a fascinating aspect of comics that I hadn't been as aware of before. So that's been a great learning curve for me. I've also found out this season about so many great books that have just hitting our shelves, things like Pedro Martin's Mexicid, things like Drawn to Change the World. That's been absolutely brilliant to have those creators coming straight when they've just been releasing things that were great. To have Jess Bradley and Mo O'Hara on, to have Beth and Jess from the Inflatable series on as well. So thank you each and every guest who has been on. Your contributions have been brilliant and really continue to develop my thinking about comics, how they're made, what their role is in education, and how we can learn from the way that they're made and put that into some of our writing practice in the classroom and in the library as well. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do that. And you can do that by sharing with your colleagues, with your friends who might be interested, by leaving a 5-star review, by retweeting an episode that you've particularly enjoyed, and by following on our social media platforms, as I have already said. So thank you so much for your support. There's been a great number of listeners this season. Really looking forward to coming back in the new year with an exciting and varied lineup for you. My name is Lucy Braidley. I'm the producer and host of Comic Boom. Thanks for listening.